Hello, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I'm Justin Sloan.
And I'm Paul Zeidman. And this is a new one for us. I don't think we've ever had three guests at the same time before. So three authors, one project. So let's see. We got, I apologize if I mess up your names. So Rich Hosek.
That's it. Hosek, first time.
Hosek. Okay, we got Rich Hosek and we got Arnold Rudnick and Loyd Auerbach. And let's, for clarity's sake, Loyd with one L.
All right, welcome. It's like a party in here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, guys. Great to meet you. So before we get to talking about your writing, let's talk about anything we may have read or watched in the recent weeks that may have struck a chord, good or bad. Who wants to go first? Feel free.
Yeah.
You know what? I will, because
Please.
I just actually kind of reread a book I read years ago. I'm listening to the audio version. There's an author named Jonathan Carroll who wrote a book called The Land of Laughs. When I first read it in the 80s, it was like instantly became one of my favorite books. And I was just talking to someone else about, favorite books recently, and I checked to see if there's an audio version. It's actually part of a Neil Gaiman Presents series. So knowing that Neil Gaiman's a fan of it too, kind of like, all right, so I've got some good taste here. And but it's one of those books that just haunts you because it is almost perfect.
Wow.
It's the right length. It's a story that grabs you and you keep on wanting to turn the page to find out what happens, and the ending is satisfying. And if anyone is looking for a new author to get addicted to, I highly recommend it.
What genre is? I mean, when you say it's Neil Gaiman, it automatically makes me think of a certain kind of book. But I'm curious if it's something that you would not expect Neil Gaiman to say, "Hey, you should read this."
It's it's a little bit of horror, I want to say, because but it's also got some sort of fantasy elements to it, urban fantasy, but in a rural fantasy, really.
Okay.
So it's got some sort of fantasy and horror elements to it, but it's extremely well crafted. And I just listening to it adds another dimension to it too, because it just is one of those books. It's like I'm surprised how much of it I remember, because usually when I read a book, I'll forget it and I can read it like a few years later and be, oh, this is surprising what this is. But I know exactly what's going to happen because it really stuck with me.
Wow.
And it's still enjoyable hearing it again, just the way he sort of pulls everything together, and you get to sort of enjoy the interaction of the characters. Just really well done.
It's in The Land of Laughs.
The Land of Laughs by Jonathan Carroll.
Wow, sounds great.
I have one. I'll jump in with 1923. I've been obsessing over this. For people who know me, I was 100% and still am, I guess, obsessed with 1883, which was the other Yellowstone spinoff. I'm not that into Yellowstone, surprisingly, but I love the two spinoffs with all my heart. They are equally amazing and some of the best TV I've ever seen in my life. So go watch it.
What do you think about the Kevin Costner's leaving Yellowstone?
I'm not that into Yellowstone. Like, I tried watching it and I couldn't get into it. I thought, okay, I see why people like it, but it's not my bag. It's kind of
surprised he did television for so long.
Yeah.
That's true. I will jump in next. So for you three, that I've slowly been working my way through my Netflix queue, like all those things that have been just sitting there for years and I never got around to watching them. And there was something from a couple of months ago that was supposed to arrive on Tuesday of last week. It didn't end up arriving until Friday, and then we had a very busy weekend, so I haven't watched it. So I did try to squeeze in something, and I was just scrolling through HBO Max. I'm a big comic book fan, so I found the adaptation of Batman Year One, which is from 2011. And the amazing thing is that they got Bryan Cranston to be Commissioner Gordon. And I didn't see the credits until afterward. I thought, this really sounds like Bryan Cranston. So I had to look it up on IMDb. I was like, oh my gosh, how did they get Bryan Cranston? I think this might have been like just as Breaking Bad was starting to build, or like this was like really before he blew up, but he does a great job. And I mean, I'd read the comic book as well. So, and a lot of the shots are like pretty much recreations of the panels in the comic, but it's really good. And I thought they did a really good job with it. And I enjoyed it. It's like what, an hour, 5 minutes long. So if you just, you're looking for something to have on in the background, you're folding laundry or whatever, you can't go wrong with Batman.
Well, since you mentioned that kind of movie, I watched actually the new Legion of Superheroes animated film last night that just came out. A little different take on Supergirl's origin. Little different take on the Legion as well. And there's a character that I wouldn't even give a spoiler for this, but there's something that happens in this that's completely different from the comic books. in a real big way. But it was a really good movie. I will just say, if you watch the special features afterwards, don't, because it'll give you the spoiler, unfortunately.
Oh, wow. Is that on
Don't watch them beforehand.
Is that on disc or is it on HBO Max?
It is not on HBO Max yet. Usually they take about 2 months. I just watched the
Ah.
Super Sons thing a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
It's on disc right now, disc and rentable, buyable otherwise for things. And as it happens, I just finished reading a 4-issue run of the Demon comic book from 1992, in which they predicted essentially he was running for president for the Republican Party. And I got to say, it was like sending chills, because the author apparently, he knew what he was talking about like 20 years ahead of time.
Wow. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Mr. Rudnick, what have you got for us?
You know, I've been trying different things, binge watching, and I am growing to enjoy Poker Face, which is on Peacock, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
And I would definitely, I'm going to keep giving it a shot. The pilot I watched and did not love, but I've grown into it. And Rich and I had written a script way back for Brandon Tartikoff, and the lesson we learned from that is he used to give, Family Ties would not have been on the air if it were today, because people would just cancel things right away. But a lot of shows we would give a chance. So I do recommend, if you start watching something, to at least give it 2 or 3 tries. And it's there's something about it that I'm not loving, which I don't want to spoil, but there's so much good about it. The casting is amazing, the writing, the characters, and it's kind of got that Highway to Heaven, Incredible Hulk kind of feeling. It's the heroine is traveling across the country for reasons you'll see in the pilot, and just helping people along the way. And the gimmick of the show is, I don't think they even need it as much, is she knows when someone is lying. Like, she just calls it out as bullshit. It's, if someone says something, she knows it's a lie, but not always what the lie is. And so she has to right wrongs along the way.
Okay, so I'd heard it was a lot more like a Columbo type of thing, where there's
very
a mystery.
No, it's very much like Columbo, but what I'm comparing is the kind of on the road, and the way you go to different locations each time, which Columbo didn't do. I mean, he was solving crimes in, it's got that investigator. She even practically delivers Columbo in some of the scenes, the way it's like, one more thing. I love those moments, but I really like the fact that it's such an anthology. And I'm also I'm going to give it a few more chances, but Not Dead Yet is a show that
not quite dead. Not
what?
quite. It's not quite dead, I think.
No, Not Dead Yet.
Not dead yet. Okay, I've watched a couple episodes.
Yeah, and it got terrible reviews. Like, the show was dead on arrival-ish, but it's pretty charming. And again, it's got fun guest cast, so it combines. I won't go into. Ghosts. Absolutely got ghosts, but my wife and I were watching it. I'd like it to focus a little bit more on the guest characters than on the series characters, but I understand why they're focusing on the series character, because it is, after all, a series. So
very cool. That's excellent. So a very wide variety of viewing choices for everybody out there. So before we get to the project that all 3 of you collaborated on, let's get just a little bit about each of you. Just kind of like give us a thumbnail sketch of your background, and also feel free to mention how you connected with the other 2 writers. So Rich, we'll start with you.
Oh, well, okay. So actually, Arnold and I met way back in college. I was taking a cinematography class, and Arnold was too, and we both had to make student films, so we decided to crew for each other, and we started collaborating on a lot of other stuff too. We did stuff for the local community cable when such a thing was popular, and then Arnold moved off to Hollywood, and I went to try my hand at film school, see if I originally get my undergraduate degree in computer engineering, and then but I got the writing bug, and I said, well, let me try this screenwriting thing, and I went to Columbia College in Chicago for a year, but said, you know what, I'm just gonna go to Hollywood. Let's give it a shot. And met up with Arnold and his wife out there. Got some jobs on some TV shows. We eventually got to write for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Star Trek Voyager and a bunch of other fun shows, including the New Addams Family. And then once I started having a family and all that kind of stuff, my wife at the time says, we got to move to Chicago if we're going to raise a family. So kind of gave that up. But recently, in the last 5 years or so, have been doing novels, and so been working on books. And one of the projects I wanted to do was reviving a collaboration that Arnold and Loyd and I had done years ago, called Rainy Day. But I'll let Arnold go into that more, because that was he and Loyd actually started that project. That was kind of an interloper on that one.
Yeah. So yeah, as Rich said, we met in college making movies, and it was before Wayne's World when we were doing community cable. And then when I was in Hollywood, I ended up working at the Paramount Pictures story department. And while I was there, one of my jobs was to find books before the internet, to find research, and the executives tasked me with finding an expert on the paranormal for a script that was in development. And so I'm good at my job, and I met Loyd, who was recommended by many, many sources independently as being the person to talk to. And while that project didn't get made, Loyd and I stayed colleagues and became friends and began developing a project together, which was a TV series about these investigators. And during that time, Rich and I had always collaborated or read each other's work, but we made a commitment to start writing together. And we kind of really, at least back then, you needed to be an identity as a writer. And to go out to agents, it being an ampersand meant they get twice the work for the same price, but it wasn't like being partnered with everyone. It was, we are an entity. And so Rich and I made that commitment. And so Loyd and I had this project, and we talked about it, and we brought Rich in on it, and we developed this project, Rainy Day, back before the X-Files, and everybody said nobody's going to want to do paranormal. So let alone a male-female investigative team. So then X-Files kept this in a shelf for 10 years. And then after that, like Rich said, he revived it. But I'll segue to Loyd's, how he became the expert he is, so that I found him for Paramount.
Well, I've been interested in this subject in the paranormal since I was a kid, and I was determined to become a parapsychologist, and was fortunate enough that after I finished as I was finishing my undergraduate, there was actually a new master's program that had developed, which unfortunately has since gone by the wayside, here in California at John F. Kennedy University, which is now National University. So I got my master's in parapsychology, worked at a research organization in New York, then came back out to JFK to teach. I was on the graduate faculty for quite some time, teaching parapsychology and other things. Actually, I'm still technically on the faculty as a part-time faculty member for there. In the process, I also got huge publicity for our department and for me when Ghostbusters came out as a real-life Ghostbuster, to the point where I ended up with a book deal and got my first book published in 1986. That was ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, which a number of people have used as research for films and other things. I've been told, actually, it was really nice that Whoopi Goldberg a number of years ago when I met her thanked me for my book, because the writer of Ghost actually used the book as one of a couple of resources for that movie. My family's in television. My dad was a producer, my uncle a director. My brother works at the Today Show right now. So I've been around TV. Actually, I was on TV, I'm told, when I was 6 months old, apparently, as a placeholder for something. So I've done a lot of television. So I'm really mired in not just the field of parapsychology, but also the pop culture aspect of things. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a comic book fan too.
That is great. That is a great origin story. Okay, so Rich and Arnold, you were okay. I'm trying to get the timeline right. So Arnold and Loyd, you were working on the story, but then you brought Rich into it. So how did you go about developing the story, or did you already kind of know, like, this is what we want it to be? And then, and when Rich came into it, did anything change? Was it a big change, or was it just kind of like, oh, yeah, Rich can help, I don't know, fine tune it?
I think by that time, so Rich and I had independently written many different things, and also began collaborating on both specs for everything from Married with Children Mad About You, The Simpsons, everything. And so we had been writing a lot together while concurrently Loyd and I had developed the concept for a series about a paranormal investigator and a cop with a near-death experience. And so by that time, we were far along in developing the story, but we hadn't spec'd out a script for it yet. And so when Rich came on, the three of us worked together and wrote basically a TV movie of what was originally called Psychops and then changed to Rainy and Day Supernatural Sleuths. So the three of us collaborated on the screenplay. Rich and I had already developed a way of passing things back and forth. They're sitting in the same room. And I think by that time, Loyd, refresh my memory, I think Rich and I kind of did some of the lifting on the script and then would send it to Loyd. But Loyd and I had already outlined the characters, outlined the film.
We'd actually had a rough first draft of a script too, at that time too.
Yeah. At that time, it was meant for Anthony Edwards and Brian Dennehy were our dream cast.
Right.
So you may ask, who is going to play Jennifer, the female? An executive was the one who came in and advised us that it may be good to have a male-female team. And we loved that idea. So we painstakingly set about revising the script to introduce Jennifer by searching out all the pronouns and changing them from he to she. And everybody said, this is an amazingly written, strong female character. And the new secret to writing a strong female character is write a strong character. And so then we had Jennifer and Nate, and got a little bit of response. But again, the initial response back then was nobody wants to do paranormal.
Interesting. So, okay, so that kind of leads to the inevitable question. So you have this script or screenplay. So how did you make the transition to making it into a book?
That's a rich question, apparently.
That was my job. So I got, so after my son kind of hit high school and didn't think I was this cool anymore, and I had extra free time on my hands, I decided, I had a bunch of novels, in the drawer, I had started. And I thought that this would make a great book series because I was looking for an idea for that. And so I went back and I looked at the script and I reached out to Arnold and Loyd. I said, hey guys, what do you think about novelizing this and making it into a series that way? Because we had like, a bunch of story ideas in place. A lot of Loyd's stuff was great source material for this stuff. So I just sat down with the screenplay and novelized it, which was an interesting process because I found myself, with the freedom to not only break free of the constraints of the 2-hour TV movie format, but also add additional characters, dive more into their their thoughts, their backstories, and create something that sort of really fleshed out what I thought was our vision for the whole thing in the first place. And it turned out really well. We were very, very happy with the way it went. So after I wrote the first draft, sent it off to Loyd for technical advice, I sent it off to Arnold for story advice, and then we all made notes on it, passed it around to some more people, got some good feedback, made some changes. And then we just said, you know what, let's get this out there. Let's see what happens. And so that's what we did with that particular version of that was the book Near Death, a rainy day investigation. And we've just released the second book in the series, Afterlife, which is actually based on one of my favorite cases that Loyd has investigated. Segue to Loyd.
Yeah, loosely based. I mean, the basic undercurrent of that is that it was kind of the case that made me switch from being just simply middle of the road about are ghosts real or are they something else psychic, to where consciousness exists after death. It was pretty clear to me in this one case because the amount of communication that this young boy, he was 12 years old here in the Bay Area. First of all, everybody in the family had seen the ghost separately, but weren't talking to each other until the kid called them out, which is itself pretty interesting. How he knew that they had seen the ghost is because the ghost told him. And he, in the process, provided us with family stories that were not written down by anybody. In fact, the woman who was the ghost only had one living relative who was in his early 90s. I was able to track him down because there was an attorney involved blocking these people who had bought the house the woman had owned from contacting him, because he was 92 and in a assisted living facility not too far away. And I was able to track him down and talk to him on the phone. And he actually finished every story I was given by this kid from the ghost, plus some really interesting insight into what it's like being a ghost, because I asked a lot of those questions. It felt, honestly, the situation we were in after hearing everything about the situation of the stories and everything, sitting in a room, a living room, with the mother, a grandmother, this kid's grandmother, the kid, an empty chair, and my two other investigators directing questions at the chair, the empty chair, and having him look over and say, here's what she says, and having him pretty much provide that. I felt like I was in a sitcom. I mean, it really was that kind of situation. Totally friendly ghost. In fact, apparently the ghost helped him with his homework. So a lot of really kind of cool
Except
stuff.
the new math, none of the new math.
Well, I think she was actually pretty good at math too. You know, that at least what he was seeing at 12. So there was some really kind of cool stuff about this that Rich kind of took and ran with the backstory of what we're dealing with in the novel, the mystery in the novel.
Yeah, the point of the books, each book is to sort of present a mystery that is centered around one specific type of paranormal phenomena. So the first book deals with a near-death experience that our main protagonist undergoes, but he's a complete skeptic. So he is trying to find other justifications and rationalizations for all this stuff he's experiencing. And now Afterlife is based around a story where a young boy is communicating with a ghost, and she just happens to be someone who had hidden some loot from a bank robbery 15 years earlier before she died, but can't quite remember exactly where she put it.
Yeah. So it does raise the question, and I'll do this one and then I'll toss it to Justin. So originally, okay, you said it was more kind of like a detective kind of story, or in paranormal investigators. So it made me think, okay, it's kind of maybe takes itself kind of seriously, but then the way you're describing it, and Loyd's talking about it, felt like it was in a sitcom. Then it's like, is it kind of like mystery comedy? Is it paranormal comedy? I mean, does it just have a little of everything? Is it all ages? Or, I mean, do you have to be of a certain age to really get it?
No, I think it is pretty much all ages, like teen and above. And it's because it is a full-length novel. And it is very lighthearted at times. A lot of people really enjoy the interactions and relationships between the characters, and but there's a mystery at the heart of it. So at its heart, it is a mystery story. It's I kind of put it in the same genre as like a Moonlighting.
Okay,
if people remember that. Gosh, my cultural references are so old.
Yeah, no, yeah. I will say honestly, if if folks who know me and take my classes, my parapsychology online classes and such, I try to bring humor into everything, because being lighthearted, being humorous, even in my investigations, honestly, because it really kind of cuts through any fear that people might have. So it really is the fact that while it may not be straight comedy, there's a lot of humor out here, and certainly in the situations that I deal with and the people that I deal with.
I'll say, Loyd, I really love your toys. That's awesome. Good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's only a little tiny portion of what's actually here around me. So
awesome. Yeah. And the nonfiction books look awesome. I'm wondering, before this, had you attempted fiction much? Have you played around in that realm at all?
I haven't in college, I wrote a bunch of stories for a kind of advanced creative writing class. I have the intention to write some fiction. I've got a couple of things I've started, like Rich, things in the drawer. At one point I'll get to actually writing those novels when I have some time to actually write some more. But usually people have been after me to write some more nonfiction.
Yeah. It's a different bug, I feel like, that eats away at your skull. You got to try to feed both of them at different times.
Right.
Right. Yeah, so I've written some books before, and I've written some books with 2 people and with 3 people even, so I can understand how it could be complicated. So I'd love to hear more about how that process worked for you all, and what were your lessons learned that you could pass on to other people who might attempt the same.
Well, Rich really did a lot of the heavy lifting, because he reached out and insisted on putting all our names on it, so we had to come up and do some work. Loyd's done a ton with the research and vetting Jennifer's dialogue, and would a parapsychologist say that, and would a ghost say that? But we've kind of developed a way of sharing and trusting each other with stuff, and I think that would circle back to something that that we've shared with other people is anytime you're collaborating, I think you need to have that conversation up front and plan for success. If you don't talk with your partners about what you're trying to do, where you're going to end up, what you're going to do if different things happen, then, you know, great best case scenario, you have a wonderful success and suddenly you have a rights issue or, you know, a studio or a network interested and you're not agreeing. I think it's really important to kind of delineate expectations and understanding. So, which we've known each other for 3 decades, so it's there implicitly, but you know, then it was just working out the nudging and emailing and technology, and Zoom has. Rich is in Chicago, I'm in LA, and Loyd's in San Francisco.
Awesome. Was this your first book, Rich?
This was actually the second book I had written.
Okay.
The first book I published.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, the first book I wrote was a thriller called The Dead Kids Club.
Yeah, I see that's on there, and you published that after the fact.
Yeah.
After this one.
Yeah.
Okay. What's that one about? I'd love to hear a little bit about that too. Do you feel like it's in the same brand? Are you focused on brand at all?
It's, you know what, it's not in the same brand. It's more of a series of what I call everyman thrillers. What I call ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And this one is about a couple, divorced couple, whose child is killed in a car accident, and the guy who killed the child gets away with it. They have a trial and he's acquitted, and they decide, you know what, we're going to take justice into our own hands. And so they take an elaborate plan to sort of not only kill the guy, but get away with it, because that's the way they feel they need to sort of justify it, is like, we can't allow his justice to take away our lives too.
Yeah.
And during the process of this, they get involved with a parents surviving support group, a group of parents who've lost their children. And they meet other parents who are in similar circumstances. And so after they take care of their child's killer, they say, well, maybe we should help out these people too. And so it becomes sort of a little dark, almost Dexterish type of situation where they become accidental serial killers.
Awesome. This is the kind of stuff that I can watch on TV for sure, and movies. But when I try to read it, I get too depressed. It's too.
Well, that's the thing too. I mean, when I'm writing these books too, having a TV background, I find myself thinking about it in terms of TV. So a lot of people tell us that these books read very cinematically, because that's how I write them. It's like I can't help it. We spent what, 17? I spent 17 years in Hollywood, and about 10 of them we were writing, making a living as writers, and so it's something that's kind of like baked into my style for this.
Yeah.
And then having Arnold to sort of, you know, break the stories down with me for these novels here, where we'll go back and forth. I was like, yeah, I need an idea for this. Let's talk about this, and just to talk it out, and then to be able to get source material from Loyd. Loyd is an inspiration in many ways he doesn't even realize, because I'll just pick up stuff that he's dropping all the time and just incorporate it in the books. In fact, I think he's going to be surprised in this next book where I kind of dropped a little something that he kind of like inspired, I think unintentionally.
He hasn't found the cameras that we've hidden in his either.
That's why I have an EMF meter.
Yeah.
Not for ghosts, just for finding hidden cameras and bugs.
Nice. And Arnold, I see that you're not only focused on one brand either, on Amazon anyway, right?
I am not. And you know, Rich and I date back to the time we were in the Warner's Comedies Writers Workshop, and back then you defined yourself as being 8:30 or 9:30 writers, right?
Okay,
because it was a totally different kind of sitcom on those hours. With streaming, you know, we always enjoyed, we did cable cop, you know, shows and Star Trek Voyager and half-hour sitcoms and feature films. And but yeah, so the first book I did, and this also dated back to Rich and I, when he moved, you know, back to Chicago, our writing went a different direction, and we continued to develop some features. But I wrote ESP 6th grade sense on my own. My kids were in school at the time. I would go to the book fairs. My son taught me, you know, when you tell people don't judge a book by a cover, everybody does. They buy the book based on the cover, you know, at book fairs. And I wanted to write that kind of book. And Loyd actually did the foreword for that. And it's about a 6th grader who can read minds. And when it doesn't help, you know, secret, it, you know, people's minds change. And so I would go to schools and talk about, writing and talk about ESP. And all of the teachers I knew were younger or taught younger grades, K, first, second. So I wanted to do a book for them. And one of my passion projects is Little Green, which is about a frog who wants to be special and hops around asking, isn't it possible that he could be a horse or a goose or a koi? And it's not. You can't be something you're not. So that was a literacy lesson book that I really got behind championing. And it's 11 years old now. I did a 10th anniversary edition celebrating the 50th anniversary of Reading is Fundamental of Southern California together. And, I just enjoy promoting that. And then these other projects, a few, and lots. It's fun. If writing is writing. It's people are starting to realize it used to be if you write for TV, you can't write for features. People now realize if you can write, you can write.
Yeah. Cross genres too sometimes. I'm hearing that more and more with like managers and stuff where they're like, nah, don't worry, like focus on the brand to get you out there, but we're gonna get you everywhere. And I like that.
Yeah.
I like this. Yeah, ESP, and then you have an image on the front that's kind of reminiscent of what we saw in Ghostbusters, the Bill Murray's character.
The Zener cards, yes.
Yeah.
Loyd's taught me a lot about those, and I would go to school events, and really interesting. I brought the old Zener cards and would do a very abbreviated version of the test. I think you're supposed to do 100 throws or something.
I mean, it's the deck is 25, so at the minimum you've got to do all 25. But
right, and you're supposed to do it several times.
Yeah.
And I would have people come up, and we would record what they felt they perceived, and it was so regularly 20% as an average. And then I had these two kids come up, and they were like 80%, 60 to 80%. They were going through a divorce at home. They were going through some hardship. Loyd and I talked about it after because I was like, this is crazy. They were twins, and the trauma or hardship going on were all signs of an increased, connectivity. So it was really interesting, and not scientific, but anecdotally.
Yeah, really cool. I'll go back to Loyd for last one. I think we'd love to hear about all your screenwriting experience too, if Paul wants to jump back on that, or I'll come back to it at the end. But Loyd, I know my wife would love your books, especially Psychic Dreaming, and it looks really cool too. A couple questions on that. One, I'm curious, are not all your stuff is self-published? Question mark.
Well, Psychic Dreaming is not.
Okay.
Yeah, actually. So I have several books out. I have a couple books from Ronin Publishing out of Oakland. I've got the Psychic Dreaming book. There was another one that Llewellyn actually had out. They just put it out of print called Mind Over Matter. ESP Wars East and West is from Crossroads Press. So I've gone through different publishers over the years, and cool. And I actually teach a publishing class through National University now, JFK previously. Self-publishing is a really interesting thing, and I just was talking to a friend of mine who's an author. He's a mystery author who's published a whole bunch of his own novels, self-published. Arnold knows who that is, Richard Wren, and he's 97 now. And he's written a kid's book, and I have to talk to Arnold about that. And he wanted to know if he should go to an agent and a publisher. And I said, you're 97. It'll never get published before you die. Even if you sell it tomorrow, it's still going to be a year and a half before it comes out. And the timeline for traditional publishing is horrendous sometimes. I know that from my first book. It can be difficult. So, I'm not necessarily, I'm bringing a couple more of my books back into print. I'm going to self-publish them or work with Arnold on that. I don't have an interest in, unless a publisher wanted to offer me a big advance, I have no interest in going to a regular publisher. A bookstore will actually have, for nonfiction, they might have 2 copies, unless it's already selling well. They might have 2 copies on the shelf. Those 2 copies sell, and until the next time that individual bookstore does an inventory, unless someone asks for it, they may never again order those books, ever, because of shelf space. Mm-hmm. So the idea of being in bookstores, there are 5,000 bookstores or so out there in the independent and otherwise. Yeah. That's 5,000 sales, but that's not a lot when it comes right down to it. So, it really depends.
Yeah, it's like you might luck out, but who knows? But so yeah, I'm writing writing stuff related to reincarnation, and my wife's working on some book thing related to kind of dream stuff. So would this be the book that you'd recommend, or do you feel like there's another one that you
Certainly for psychic dream, for dreams. Yeah. I mean, it's not, it has a little bit of generally about dreams. I actually have a book out, which is only in Kindle and Nook format. I decided not to put it in a hard copy since it went out of print, called Reincarnation Channeling Possession, which would be really good if you're writing about reincarnation.
Yeah.
But I also
Nice.
recommend books by Jim Tucker, who is the guy when it comes to investigating reincarnation cases.
Oh, really cool. Jim Tucker, huh? Writing that down. Let's see, you hear the click, click, click right now. Okay. And all right, Paul, you want to hop back in?
Yeah, actually, so this is a question about the actual writing. So this first one's really, I guess, more towards Rich, because you were talking about, you're the one who kind of like adapted it from screenplay to novel. So you said it kind of freed you a little bit. I'm always curious because when I started writing, when I was a kid, I was all about writing books, but then I learned how to write a screenplay, and it kind of like forced me to relearn how to do it just for screenplays. And I think it would be really tough for me to try and write a novel now, because I'm so used to my brain is like hardwired now to just write it in screenplay format. So, real minimal text on the page type of thing. How was it for you? And then the second question, because we've talked about this on the show before, is about outlining. So when you were working on the story, I guess first for the screenplay and then for the book, did you already have an idea of what you wanted the story to be, or did you kind of make it go along? I mean, I'm one of those people, I have to outline before I start on a script, but is that for you as well? Or do you kind of like, hey, let's just see what happens? So kind of like, if Rich, you could handle the adaptation question and then throw it to the rest of you.
Yeah, well, the adaptation, I found the adaptation going from a screen format to a novel to be easier than what I would imagine doing the reverse to be. And I'm a big fan. Whenever I see a movie based on a book, I'll go read the book too, because I want to see how that kind of what the transformations were, what the changes were, and I'm always glad when they kind of like do a different version of it. But in this case, we had basically a really fleshed out outline because we had the screenplay. Now, when I was going
after
near death,
different, yeah.
So as I was going through it, though, things just kind of came to me. So I had the outline was basically the screenplay. I didn't write anything else besides that. And as I was going through it, I found myself saying, you know what? This Dr. Jennifer Day has just one graduate assistant. Wouldn't she have like maybe some other people working for her too? A tech guy, an undergraduate assistant, and stuff like that. And so I was able to throw these other characters in that added additional relationships, additional interactions, and so forth. And then that just kind of like sort of sprouted. And I've heard the two different types of styles called architect and gardener, where you kind of just sort of either plan it out very meticulously and then build it, or you kind of plant the seeds and see what comes up. So this case, it was kind of a combination of both, because we had a very structured story. We knew where it was going to go. We knew who the bad guy was. I think that's important for a mystery. If you're going to write a mystery, I think you need to have that outline. You need to know what the end is going to be there. And then it's easier to sort of plant the clues along the way and make sure that you're laying the groundwork for the actual mystery part of it. But as it's going along, especially in a novel, I find that the characters take you places that you didn't necessarily anticipate. So you go down these places, and then one of the things that we had sort of instigated for the character of Nate is that he was an oenophile. He loved wine and gourmet foods and stuff like that. And so I got a chance to play with that a little bit more and see how that sort of strengthened the relationship between him and Dr. Day. So all of these little moments that kind of built up. And then also I threw in a character of his great uncle. So the story starts off in the past. That's one of the things that's with these novels is they start off in the past with some sort of inciting incident that sort of is the seed for the mystery that unfolds throughout the book. And in this particular case, I said, it'd be kind of fun since it's in the past. Why does it be one of Detective Nate Rainey's relatives who was involved in this case? So we can bring that character in and sort of see more of why he became a cop and all that kind of stuff. So those sorts of things weren't in the screenplay that we wrote, but they kind of like emerged as I was writing it. And I said, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And I often described it as like, I just let the characters like lead me where they want to go instead of me telling them what they're doing.
During the I guess the adaptation process, did you ever come up with an idea and then pitch it to the other two, and which would take things in a totally different direction. I mean, did you veer off course at all, or were you able to just use the screenplay like, okay, this is what is going to happen, and we get from point A to point B to point C, and so on and so on?
Yeah, there were some changes in that regard. The screenplay, I think, was a little bit more comedic. We had some visual gags in it and stuff like that kind of like sort of set more of a comedic tone to it, and I kind of like sort of toned those down a little bit. Remember one of the scenes in the screenplay was that first time we go to the police office, there's people in a holding cell, and you hear someone shout in the background, "Hey, somebody book this clown." And you see an actual clown walking through the police station, which in a TV show would be very funny to see. It's a great bit, but it's like, you know what? Writing that in a book, it just didn't feel like it belonged in that case. And I felt, I can tone that down a little bit, talk a little bit more about what's going on here, get really into inside the minds of the characters. Writing in third person, you can sort of like do whatever you want. You're God looking down on the whole scene. You can look inside people's heads. You can understand their motivations, tell their backstories, and have all that stuff going on at the same time. So it really kind of frees you in a way that writing a screenplay doesn't allow you to do, because you can only write down what people are going to see.
Right.
Yeah, and they're definitely different art forms. And Rich is a wordsmith. I mean, he did a great job in embellishing that. And I think a couple of characters got added. But again, your question, Paul, was really great. It's what one person may see as veering off, another, like, I don't think Loyd and I felt anything Rich did was out of character or out of subject. And there were one or two questions, especially in relation to the university and things where he was pushing against, some of the sexual tension or those kind of things, where we did have conversations and we really talked about where do we see this going, and does it create something in the series and the characters. But those questions came up because of the nature of a different, a book is a book, and the best version of a book is not going to be the screenplay alone.
Right. So I do want to go back to the question about the outlining process. So I guess, so for Arnold and Loyd, because you were working on one version, but it also sounds like Rich and Arnold, when you were developing the stories for each, and then you were able to combine them, were there any big disagreements, or like, no, we can't do it that way, that's because that way doesn't work? Or Loyd would come and say like, well, a parapsychologist would never say that sort of thing. I think you alluded to that earlier.
So
I just want to one quick story before you get into Arnold. One of the first scenes I wrote was the near-death experience. And I was completely naive to the whole subject. I mean, I was aware of it and stuff. And my logical brain, I'm like thinking, okay, you're dead. You're shed of all your physical accoutrements, right? And so as you're like floating down this tunnel of light, toward the light, I envisioned you being naked. And Loyd came back to me and said, yeah, no. When you think of yourself, when you picture yourself in your mind, you picture yourself naked? No, of course not. And when you're in that sort of psychic mode, that consciousness, why wouldn't they think of themselves with clothes on as well? And so that was one of the things that kind of like, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. And it kind of like really connected me and grounded me to the whole thing. It's like, because, okay, now it's not just some sort of like physical thing that's happening that has a logical explanation. There's other aspects of it around the consciousness that you have to consider.
When I was growing up, one of my first recollections of a ghost TV show besides Casper was a show called Topper.
Oh.
And as I was getting interested in parapsychology and all of this stuff, I always wondered, where in the world did the Kirbys get their clothing from? Because they were always changing their clothes. I mean, let alone how did they drink any alcohol? That was a different story in that show. And it's something that you had to dig. When I was getting into the field in the literature, you had to dig back quite a ways. Although finally someone else wrote a journal article about it as well. And it was a question that I asked that kid to ask the ghost. And it's something that we were able to kind of piece together, because if you look cross-culturally, ghosts always show up with clothing, unless you're in a culture where there's very little clothing. I guess there could be a naked ghost from a nudist colony. That would be something as well. And interestingly enough, most ghosts, when they're visually perceived, because it's not really through your eyes, they're only seen to about their knees. And most of us, when we visualize ourselves, unless you happen to buy a lot of shoes or are into feet, you only think of yourself down about mid-thigh or right above your knee. That's the picture people come back with. So there's certain things that are very common sense that fit in here. And I tried to bring that, and anytime anything came up in the discussions with Rich and Arnold over the years, it's really about that, is what are people actually reporting, not what does the folklore say?
Yeah, to get on point to your question, I'm sure there were arguments back then. I mean, when Rich and I would sit late at night writing half hours, we would argue over individual lines or words within the line. And we would get to the point where one of us would offer to have our pinky cut off because we believed in it so much. And then the other person would back down and be like, okay, if you're willing to give up a finger. Thankfully, yeah, we got through that.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I'm sure we've had those conversations. When we revisited this, we were all, let's use the term mature, that I think we were just thrilled with the collaboration and all on point, but we still would speak up and call things out if it was like, no, you can't do that. Or, I'm not going to do a spoiler on it, but there was one thing Rich left out of the book initially. And I was like, but I love that. So he figured out a way to go back and keep that in. So, I mean, when we were collaborating, Loyd and I really got very far along in creating the story and the characters. Mm-hmm. And like he said, a treatment, albeit a script. And I think the transition to the script that the three of us did together was just an outgrowth of some of the experience that Rich and I had at the time.
Right. And
again, that's why it had a lot more humor and where we were doing stuff in that vein. But I think you want to fight over things, because if you don't care, then if you don't care enough to fight over it, it may not be as good as it can be. And you have to be working with people. People have compared, Rich and I during the time to a marriage, my wife included, because we work together and it's that kind of partnership. And Loyd, in joining that, you have to trust each other enough and you have to speak up and really feel comfortable to argue for what you believe in, but you don't need to argue just to argue. One of the biggest things I think in our collaboration that we got to is sometimes I felt, well, I'm not contributing enough. So I felt bad about that. And Rich would point back, well, no, you help with this or this, or vice versa. And we all support each other by doing a different part. And we don't need to get in the way of the project. We don't need to get in the way of the creation of the project, and we bring our stuff to it. But I think arguments are healthy, but that's also why when you go into it, you need to kind of say, well, who has the final say? Who's gonna have, and we defer to Loyd on the final say. That's anything paranormal, because who are we to question that? Loyd and I even did a seminar in Burbank. Would a ghost say that? Because we were tired of all the people in Hollywood teaching people wrong about the paranormal. And there's a responsibility in entertainment. So I think arguing is healthy, but you better have that prenup as to how to get around the argument and move forward.
Yeah, and I think it helps to kind of set the groundwork, as you mentioned before, Arnold and Rich, both of you, that you want to kind of lay out the groundwork of how we're going to work together as well. I've done that with my nonfiction collaborations over the years as well. It's really important to know who's going to do what and how much, and whose ideas might take precedence sometimes. So you have to do all that.
Okay, I have one more question, and then I will toss it to Justin. So, what's next for the Rainy Day Investigators? I mean, you just have nonstop ideas for books. You have like, oh, I got one that I've got to write, or we're working on a couple of them now, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the third book, I'm actually doing the first draft right now. It's called Farsight, and it involves the topic of remote viewing, which is something our government was actually involved with in the 70s and 80s. Project Stargate. And so I'm drawing heavily on that as background for this particular mystery. And it's going to, be, I'm not going to say too much about it, obviously, because I want you to read the book. But it's the other neat thing about these books is that we do an afterword. Loyd writes an afterword, a nonfiction sort of recap of the topics that we covered in the book, and points you to resources to get more information and that kind of stuff. But this one is like, yeah, Loyd mentioned a book that he had co-written called ESP Wars, and I read that one, and I'm like going, oh, this is perfect for rainy day, because it's like got all the cool intrigue factors to it, government program, and what could you do if someone wanted to use this for nefarious purposes. And certainly it's a intergenerational mystery too that spans a long period of time. And so it's like, yeah, let's write this one next. So that's what's coming up next for that.
Do you have a projected publication date for that one?
I'm shooting for October, Friday the 13th.
Ah,
yeah. The last book was January, Friday the 13th.
okay.
And so I'm trying to shoot for that. So I thought it'd be a good target for that one.
And all the books are standalone to enjoy the mystery, the adventure, and really the characters. But obviously, we hope people, whenever they're introduced, will want to read, the other adventures.
Sure.
So yeah, I just wanted to wrap it up by asking if you have any, especially because you have the TV experience too, thoughts for breaking into TV, but now that you're doing books as well, thoughts for breaking in as an author and how to get started in either of those worlds. The quick rapid fire version, I guess.
Okay, well, I'll start. Just write. If you're interested in writing, you have to write. And that's one of the things I think that is so important, that people, they've got an idea and they want to do it. It's like, just sit down and do it. And if you get stuck on one thing, write something else. Right now, I'm in between books. I'm also doing a series of fiction podcast short stories. So I've got that as well that I do to sort of like, fill the void in between novels. And it's a great exercise for me because they're very, short 20-minute type audio stories. Throw a little bit of sound effects in this. So it's kind of like a little mini TV show. So it takes me back to my writing roots there. And I find myself just sort of like, it's a great way to sort of work on my dialogue, polish, my storytelling, get all that stuff going, because I've been writing for decades, but I don't think you can stop learning and becoming a better writer. So, and the only way you do that is by practicing. It's like anything else. Practice.
Yeah. And after 30 years of writing, I'm still learning new. I'm in the 4th of 4 semesters getting an MFA in screenwriting at Cal State University, Northridge. And I'm getting that so I can teach, and really excited about doing that, but also developing an original pilot and an original feature as my thesis project. And I went into it, at an age that most people are being pushed out of academia, and going into it with my eyes open, but really enjoying the opportunity to learn. One of the things that I've heard and that I'd caution to take with a grain of salt maybe is there's a lot of advice to write whatever. You want to write half hour, you want to write features, you want to write comedy, it is absolutely true that we know you can write different things, but I do think Rich and I were able to sell TV and break in a way because we focus for a time. We literally spent a couple of years focused on half hours. We chose that for a reason. I was actually working in the feature office at Paramount, so every time we started a feature, a script would come in and be covered that was a similar idea, because all of these ideas are done. So, a noted story analyst and guru, Chris Vogler, taught a course we took. And, he was someone who early on said, if you have one idea, don't be a writer. It's the execution. So to Rich's point, you have to be writing, you have to be creating. But a lot of times people either write the same script over and over and over 100 times, when maybe they should move on and write something else with what they've learned and heard, or they write something different every time, never going back to rewrite a project that is closer and not putting the work in to get it to the next level where they share it and get that feedback. So I think focusing on something, and if you're choosing TV, if somebody's going to hire you, listen to them. But if you're choosing TV, a lot of people are talking about how now people want original pilots. And Rich and I were fortunate actually to write an original pilot that did sell while we were doing episodics, but that was rare and it didn't get made. But the episodics, the rule of the game was you had to write for existing episodes. And there's a formula to that, and there's a structure to that. So even if you're going to write an original pilot or an original script, following the formula is one of the best ways to learn. And I'm not a painter, but I think about Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, and it's like all the painters who learned from the masters. There's a reason that those steps were successful in the past. And I encourage anyone that I talk to kind of do that homework, whether it's in a school setting or a homeschool setting. You know, if you want to write for TV, you got to watch TV. If you want to write books, you have to read books. You know, if you're not aware of what's out there, you're not giving yourself the most advantage in pursuing a career.
And I think if you're going to write books, just know that even if you go with a major publisher, unless you're one of those people who lucks out the 0.01% who gets the huge advances, assume you're the promotion manager, you are the PR agent, you are the marketing person, you are everything at that point.
You're also the investor.
You're the investor. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah, you're doing everything.
If you're going into writing to make money, don't. If you make money from it, that's wonderful. And the old saying, I get turned off with the do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. What's wrong with work? Work is a good thing. I don't think it should be negative, but it's good if you enjoy what you're doing. And I took a while going to schools. It was hard to go to career day as a writer. My day job, I pay bills as an accountant, and I joke that I pay bills by paying bills. And, nobody wanted a career day visit from an accountant. They wanted a career day visit from an author. But I will say that whatever career you pursue, being able to write and communicate is valuable, is going to serve you well in any career.
Great advice
and,
all
and
around.
I can add one more thing, and that is if you're an author, learn how to speak to people too. Because you want to be a good interview on a podcast and you want to be able to talk to large groups as well about writing or about the subject matter that you're writing about.
Very useful. And how can we get in touch with everybody if readers want to follow you on social media or what have you, find your books, all that?
Well, let me give the abbreviated version here. If you go to our website for the books, rainyandday.com, that's RANEY and DAYE.com. Go to the contact link and you'll find all of our links for social media, for our personal websites, for other book pages and so forth like that. Perfect. So you'll find everything there. You'll also find information about how to get the Rainy and Day books on Amazon, Audible. And then you'll also see links to my podcast, Bedtime Stories for Insomniacs, and my also personal website. So, Arnold?
I'm featured on there and haven't been as active on social media, so I'll refer people there for now. I do have a website at arnoldrudnick.com, which features this book and some of the others. And that's probably the best way to reach me right now.
And folks can follow me on Twitter, either at Prof Paranormal or at Loyd Aurbach. Remember, Loyd is with one L. Thank you, Paul. Sure. I also have a Facebook page. It's Loyd.auerbach.author, so you can find me there. I do a variety of occasional Facebook Lives. I'm also teaching classes for the Rhine Education Center. That's the oldest laboratory. It's the old Duke Parapsychology Lab. Now it's just on its own. And it's Rhine, RHINE, edu.org. And I teach courses for, basically they're adult ed, they're semi-academic if you want to be graded. I have a lot of students who just take them for fun.
Great. All right. Anything else, Paul?
No, I think that this was great stuff. I mean, it sounds like wonderful reading material, and I love everybody's backstory. So it's just a real entertainment all around today.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Teaching my 5-year-old the song for Fresh Prince. So now I'll say I have a connection to it. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, thank you for checking it out. If you can leave some reviews, that's always appreciated. Go check out their books, and leave some reviews for those too. I know authors love that. And thank you so much again for listening. This is a Creative Writing Life podcast. I'm Justin Sloan. You can find my books on Amazon as well.
And I'm Paul Zeidman. You can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ.blog. I'm also on Twitter at Maximum_Z. I've got books on Amazon too. The Go Ahead and Ask series about screenwriting that also includes Pi, which is one of the best things in the world. Like he said, he's Justin. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Most importantly, go write something.